can understand you're very upset.
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
It was a 90s movie adaptation of a popular 60s television series that didn't end up being utterly terrible, like so many similar attempts at rebooting a once popular franchise.
They're dead! They're all dead!
That said, this movie has a plot that's often more nonsensical than the time I won a pub quiz by answering every question with Chris.
Okay.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to try and guess what the hell's going on in Mission Impossible.
Your mission, Jim, should you choose to accept it.
Mission Impossible was a television series that ran on CBS for 7 seasons between 1966 and 73 about the Impossible Missions Force, whose job was to gaslight some villain with an ultra-elaborate and probably very expensive trap. Instead of just assassinating some threat, the IM Force set up the baddies to incriminate themselves and would watch them be dealt with by their own associates. It was a massive hit at the time, but it was quite an expensive show with all the masks, transmitters, fake nuclear attacks, and of course, they needed a massive budget to cover all of the blank tape that they went through. Peter Graves headlined the show from its second season as team leader Jim Phelps, along with a cast that changed throughout the years. Every week he'd receive his mission on a tape that would self-destruct, with the camera having to cut before the fire extinguisher kicked in. Mission Impossible was a show that was totally plot-based, with the only characters that you ever got to know being the villains of the week. So while it had cast members who carried out the action more than others, it was generally an ensemble show about a team. The series was briefly revived on television in the late 80s, but years-long talk of a Mission Impossible movie hadn't yet resulted in a go picture. That was until Tom Cruise stepped in the mid-90s. He'd used the film to launch his producing career alongside Paula Wagner, who had been his agent for much of his career. He was apparently a fan of the television series, but the film that would result would not so much be about the Impossible Missions Force, more Tom Cruise and some other random people, most of whom would be killed off during the course of this movie. After all, this would be a Tom Cruise movie, just as that phrase would start to mean Tom. Just Tom, no team.
Now here's the plot.
Jim Phelps is the team lead of the Impossible Missions Force inside the CIA, along with his wife Claire and the Master of Disguises, Ethan Hunt. Oh, and there's also Dead Meat, Expendable, and Surplus to Requirements. I'm sure they have actual names, but realistically you only need to know who they are if you're the one writing the toe tags. One mission goes south, and Ethan's boss Kittredge makes it clear that with so many recent IM missions failing, there's an internal mole, and Ethan Hunt is the main suspect. So it was all a mole hunt. An Ethan mole hunt. Ethan escapes arrest and then goes on a newsgroup search binge where he miraculously, and somewhat comically, manages to find the trail of the traitor going by the handle of Job 314. Ethan makes a deal with Job's client, the information broker Max, where he will retrieve the knock list in exchange for Job. The knock list, or non-official cover list, is basically a list of undercover spies and their aliases. If it ever got out into the open, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and Santa are all up shit creek. We will try to explain a little later on why some of this film feels a little disjointed, like a long jumper who trains exclusively on concrete. Ethan discovers that team member Claire did survive, and he puts together a new team with Claire, hacker Luther, and Krieger, whose muscle, a procurer, and a pilot. Ethan's plot is to steal the thing that he was accused of stealing in order to flush out the real thief. It's just one of those plans that you only hear on day 3 of a bender, like my plan to walk to the moon by duct taping a bunch of ladders together. It could have worked had I not run out of first ladders, then duct tape, and then finally volunteers.
They're dead.
The team has to break into a secure computer that only one man can access. It's sealed in a vault with temperature and noise sensors, and it's a computer that's not connected to the internet, so forget about using it to stream games. But of course, there is a vent. So there's this whole rigmarole of poisoning this poor schmuck who only uses the computer to play Doom when nobody is watching. Ethan is lowered down to copy some files onto a disc, and this is the film's signature scene, played with little to no music, uses every trick to make the scene tense. It's at this point the film switches to Microsoft Minutes, where things seem to take much longer than you'd expect. We are at least spared some of the early cut of this scene, where Ethan gets error messages about having to first format the disc, and then there's not enough space on the disc to copy the files, and then Ethan has to create an account with the CIA, and then verify the account via email, and then activate two-factor authentication, and then receive a text to his mobile device. It was all going very well, but damn, there's a Windows update. They do get the disc and disappear, ready for Ethan to unmask Job. And then of course Claire's husband, the team lead Jim Phelps, is still alive, and so things are getting complicated. Or more accurately, it's already become complicated. Very complicated, like a barrage of relationship status updates by horny athletes at the Olympic Village. Traitors Jim, Claire and Krieger all end up dead, either on the train or splattered all over the tracks, and yet not a single Belgian detective investigates. Ethan's vindicated, despite his unauthorized break-in of a top-secret CIA vault that would potentially carry a very severe prison sentence. Mission Impossible is a film that is stuffed to the gills with tradecraft and plot details, all trying to make sense of a relatively simple story that just wasn't quite sorted before the cameras started rolling. Oh, it has problems. Boy, does it have problems. But it still ends up relatively entertaining, mainly down to DePalma's skill. The bullshit meter, of course, peaks at 10. That is to say, while watching this film in the cinema, there was a very high likelihood of some annoying prick yelling out bullshit. And why the hell not?
It's much worse than you think.
This is a film that really should not be as enjoyable as it is. It's clearly got a lot of issues with the script trying to gel into a cohesive shape. It's like trying to make marshmallow without gelatin. I mean, it is possible, but it's very easy to get wrong.
Is he serious?
Mission Impossible is a film with some cool set pieces that are very loosely strung together with a plot held together by chewing gum and paper clips. It is perhaps surprising to learn that this guy was not one of the writers. One of the biggest impediments to a Mission Impossible film being made earlier was obviously the script. Mission Impossible was not a property that immediately lent itself to a personality actor. That is, somebody who almost always just played a stylized version of themselves, since the original I Am Force rarely showed anything of themselves in the TV series. The solution was, this isn't a television series, it's a Tom Cruise movie. The film began production without a finished script. Or at least not one that anybody liked all that much, but multiple writers were on the case. Some writers worked on the set pieces and others tried to link together these set pieces in a way that it did at least make a sort of sense. Watching action films, even going back many decades, there are many examples of films where you just see action scenes strung together with a little bit of perfunctory dialogue that felt tacked on. Writer David Koepp worked with Brian De Palma, while the production also enlisted celebrated screenwriter Robert Towne to help connect the dots. It's a case of one parent hiding the Easter eggs, while the other dons the rubber gloves ready to clean up the kids' vomit. Rewriting the rewrites, especially after filming began, is always a sign that things won't necessarily go all that easily. Mission Impossible just ended up as one of those more obvious examples of this phenomena, but it's also one of the few times where the finished film was still enjoyable despite itself. It does often leave you scratching your head, but it also exhilarates you.
How did he do, Hannah?
Director Brian De Palma was experienced at different types of thrillers, with things like Carrie and Scarface, The Untouchables, etc. to his credit. Here was something different. It was much less violent. The late 90s was a golden age of the techno thriller, where operatives at the top of their game double-crossed each other, tried to kill each other, steal something from each other, that sort of thing. Some films worked out better than others. Mission Impossible, script issues aside, is one where it hangs together just. Mainly because Brian De Palma had put it together so well. So to fully decipher the story, you would need the Rosetta Stone and a working knowledge of ancient Greek, but De Palma's slick direction just makes you throw up your hands in the air and declare, well, whatever works. It's a film where a boring idea on paper turns out to be the film's most iconic scene. It was, for a time at least, the one thing that most people will remember from this film. I understand the film now, mainly because I've probably seen it around 7 or 8 times, and I've watched it that many times mainly because it is a fun watch. But it is nowhere near as clever as the script wants you to think it is, just as my border collie is in no way as smart as he thinks he is when he tries to round up my car's seat covers. In that regard, the script is Ethan Hunt, who's a master of deception, wearing the mask of a better film. Oh man, that's so deep. I mean, so deep I may need to excuse myself and visit the bathroom.
So far, so good.
Danny Elfman took elements of Lalo Schifrin's iconic Mission Impossible theme, as well as that other piece of music from the television series called The Plot. I'm not going to lie, this is probably my personal favourite Danny Elfman score.
I'm so sorry.
The end credits end with a new version of the Mission Impossible theme by U2's drummer and bass player, Adam Clayton and Larry Mullen Jr. respectively. Of course, when the rhythm section of one of the world's most popular bands of the 90s has to turn one of the most enduringly famous tunes in 5/4 time to 4/4 time, it's time to realise jazz is dead.
It's gone.
Ethan Hunt seems to be just like Tom Cruise. He's a Superman. He can impersonate anybody, he can find anything apart from a missing woman, and has the balance of a cat. As we'll see in the Mission Impossible films that followed, he's really good at hanging on to things. I mean, at this point, we hadn't quite got to the point where a Mission Impossible film was marketed solely on what Tom Cruise was hanging on to the side of. Though, I will be there day one for the one where he's strapped to a missile heading for the sun. For a character who's meant to be as cool as a cucumber, Ethan Hunt seems to lose his shit on a regular basis. Can't find something? Wreck the bathroom. Need to make a point? Shout at the freshly minted widow.
Wake up, Claire! Jim's dead!
Wired intensity like that does have a price, as does the apparent convenience of living next door to a Starbucks. So Ethan, perhaps it's time to switch to decaf.
Can we get a cappuccino machine in here?
How much you enjoy Mission Impossible as a feature film franchise, of course, depends on whether or not you can abide Tom Cruise. He's a very polarizing figure, where for many, you either love him or you really, really hate him. I'm somebody who won't not watch a film because he's in it, but for me, his presence doesn't make a film a must-see. He does tend to appear in the sorts of films that I like. French actor Emmanuel Beart as Claire was a seductress married to a traitor who does the job as well as expected, even with a reasonably thick accent.
And I'm going to talk to Kittredge myself, and I'm going to tell him you had nothing to do with this.
A subplot involving a love triangle between Hunt, Phelps and Claire was ditched at some point, but you can see a few remnants of the Claire and Ethan pairing, known as Clayton or Eclair, but as it's a PG-13 film, definitely not Clunt. There's a path to Hollywood films for European actors, such as Beart. You appear in a film that's considered an art house picture that garners some awards attention in the US, and the next thing you know, Tom Cruise is leeching off your luster.
I want to get the son of a bitch who did this.
Jean Reno would also start off in the French industry and would similarly appear in many tough guy roles in American movies for a long time.
Oh, thank you very much.
Ving Rhames as Luther would become a stalwart of the Mission Impossible films. He doesn't always have a huge role in every film. Luther is a master hacker, but he's one with a conscience.
What makes you trust me?
Because if you knew what you were getting into, you never would have done it.
Czerny oozes as the oily boss Kittredge, who's a guy who you just want to see him hit his head on the roof of the car every time he gets in and out of a vehicle. And of course, John Voight, owner of the John Voight car. Having him as Phelps turning out to be a traitor was fairly obvious, because even in the 90s, nobody was going to cast Voight in a role where he's killed off in the first 10 minutes. Except maybe for his daughter. Having Phelps turn out to be the traitor really annoyed fans of the original Mission Impossible.
The mere possibility is worth 10 million.
Vanessa Redgrave appears as Max, an information broker who's a person from whom you could get whatever information you wanted. Looking for a list of enemy spies? Max can help. Do you want detailed instructions on how to build an atomic bomb? Let me Max that for you. Need to find the best prices on flights to Honolulu in the off-season? There's a Max for that. Okay, there's also Emilio Estevez and Kristen Scott Thomas, but shh. Ethan Hunt, who modulated between incredibly intense and chill, does end the film with having all but one colleague from two separate teams dead. No judgment, but there are some leadership lessons there.
Yeah.
There's a lot in this movie that doesn't really work very well on the page, but somehow, because you've got a director that knew what they were doing, this mishmash of a script turned into something memorable. Mission Impossible was a fun 90s techno thriller. It took an ensemble show that prioritized plot over character development of its regular cast and turned it into a star vehicle for Tom Cruise, which prioritizes his character over every other character. I do love this movie's energy. It allows itself to be tense during conversations, but then there are long sequences without much of any dialogue. This is a film where the script revisions were almost like a cheap wallpaper covering up all of the cracks in the living room in a flipper before listing it for sale. It makes very good use of its European locations, being an early Hollywood film to show off Prague, and it's held together by DePalma's sense of where to put the camera. Of course, its biggest impediment to viewer enjoyment is possibly also its biggest asset, whether or not you can stand Tom Cruise. Mission Impossible, against all odds, was completed on time and released in May of 1996 and became a hit, eventually becoming the third biggest release of that year worldwide, behind Independence Day and Twister. Another Mission Impossible film would show up in 2000, and that would be an incredibly different take on this franchise. Eventually you would have more sequels, and then more sequels. Eventually they even brought back some of the surviving characters from this movie whose names didn't rhyme with nom foos. This review will self-destruct in 5. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.